What's up, guys? We're back. It's another Saturday, and this is Talkin TV, the podcast, with myself, the movie nerd, Dom Rizzi, and my faithful co-host, Chris Ivanko.
What's going on, guys?
I'm speaking in a little bit of a melancholic mood in order to get us in the mood for Christmas. You know, it's a time for family. It's time for joy. It's time for feeling just relaxed overall. And Chris, we also have a guest with us today, another guest after last week's smash hit Marriage Story episode. And this week, I'd say we're going to have another smash hit on our hands, but in a different way.
Oh, yeah. I think this is going to be one of the better episodes.
Definitely. Although I would definitely say also that we haven't had a bad episode yet. So
not to toot our own horn, but yeah.
Just to say, we're kind of professionals at this, just saying.
Just to be a little candid here, there was no way I could disagree with that, speaking to the audience right now, because obviously I have to say it's good, but I have been enjoying the show so far. And Pat, I hope you enjoy being with us here today. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I was about to say, does that serve as Pat's introduction?
Yeah, Pat wanted to. Yeah, so this is Pat. We go way back with Pat. He was actually like a professor of ours at film school.
Still is. Thank God.
Of ours. He still is a professor of ours.
Because we're always learning stuff from him.
True. And today we're going to learn a lot by talking about... Pat, you had a little intro for this? I'll let you introduce it.
Well, I just kind of, you invited me to... go out there and watch Black Christmas, and hey, come do a podcast afterwards.
Yeah.
And what you failed to tell me was that this was actually going to be an episode of Dominic and Chris's podcast, Mansplaining with the Best of Them. Because
that's what we do here. We mansplain.
It's three guys talking about a clearly
strong women movie.
Yeah, feminist style storyline about burning down the institutions that hold them back. And now we got to explain what's right and wrong about this film. So this is the mansplaining episode.
This is already our best episode yet. Just saying.
I think the special edition, mansplain edition, right?
All right, man. Hey, those are your words, not mine.
You walked me into a corner.
Hey, man.
I think.
Did I?
I don't know. I think we're kind of just on a roll right now. We kind of just got to go with it.
Yeah, I think so. Well, no pun intended. But listen, I mean, so this movie...
Was that a pun? I didn't think it was.
What's the format here? Because did I just spoil the movie?
Did you? I don't know.
Nah, we usually just... Listen, if you're going to be upset about spoilers, this isn't the show for you.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay.
We've already spoiled like a lot of major stuff on our show. And especially if you guys aren't tuned for spoilers, don't tune into next week's episode.
I guess we've never said it, but usually within the first 5 minutes, you know the ending of the film.
Pretty
if you listen
much.
to our episode. So obviously, I mean, why would you listen to a podcast about something before seeing it?
Right? Just
learn
stupid. The culture. Like,
it's an hour-long
shit's going
talk.
to get spoiled.
It's an hour-long conversation. What did you think
we
was
want
gonna
to talk
happen?
about the interesting things in this stuff, and the interesting things are in the spoilers. So if you're not caught up,
so Pat, since
get caught up.
Exactly. Since you are new here, basically the whole point of this show for Dom and I was a mission to still be able to think about film critically and analytically outside of film school, because obviously our paths have taken us different ways, and we're not in school anymore, but it was a very special time in our lives, and so we just wanted to be able to keep those muscles going as best we can. So we're obviously going to have fun, but we kind of don't want to just be like CinemaSins and say everything that they didn't like was a plot hole, because that's just not true. That's just some YouTube bullshit.
Not to mention the fact that CinemaSins is just bad, because they're not even actual critics. They're fucking marketers who specialize in knowing what gimmicks idiots online will get caught their attention.
Yeah.
So it seems like, let me get this right. So you just explained to me that you kind of lost something and that you're trying to kind of reclaim it a little bit. Does this sound like a certain group of villains from Black Christmas, particularly the male frat boys?
They've lost their manhood and their position of prominence, and they have to get it back by killing the women before they become too strong and independent.
Yeah, so you guys lost your, film school credits. You're not in school anymore, and now you're trying to gain it back by this podcast.
We lost our film school credit.
And I gotta say, that was a next level segue. There's that seat's always here. Just so you know.
Yeah.
The show doesn't have to be just Dom and I.
Awesome.
But Pat, we're talking about Black Christmas, the holiday blockbuster, the only movie on the holidays that
do we
matters.
call it that yet? I mean, if it just opened, or I thought we at least had to wait until the box office numbers rolled in before we determined that.
I just had my mind's already made up about Star Wars.
Okay.
Obviously, that's the holiday blockbuster, but Star Wars is gonna suck. We're talking about Black Christmas today. Pat, take it away, man. How do you want to start this conversation? There's a lot to unpack here.
I think this movie is something of a surprise because, every other Black Christmas film that I've seen, and trust me, there's a couple of them, is just literally dudes kill women. No story other than that. And I will say that they decide to add a political message that your typical slasher of just dudes killing women might be outdated. We might need to upgrade our horror movies a little bit to actually be a little more equal.
Okay. So you're saying that this movie provided an opportunity.
Yeah, it's totally different from like Sleepaway Camp. The numerous sororities or women who are just dressed in their night gear and getting slaughtered. So this is I don't think there is a single sex scene in this movie. I think they keep it out of the bedroom.
They there's a lot of scenes that get stopped from happening. So there could have been sex scenes, but they're homies. They're looking out for each other.
I was about to say there were definitely two like rape scenes in one actual rape scene that was like kind of caught in between flashbacks and bad editing, and another one that was an almost rape scene. So like I don't know how we're counting those, but
well the flashbacks. I kind of have a little bit of a theory here. The main character is Riley, and it's clear from the very beginning of the movie.
Props to Pat for actually remembering any character names in this.
Well, that's what IMDb on the phone is for. But anyway, for the most part, there's something wrong. Something happened in the past. I don't remember the dude's name, but there's some frat boy that basically did something, and they don't tell us. And it takes like 40 minutes for them to eventually let us know that he roofied her and tried to attack her. And then it's never really resolved if it was, probably like in real life, it's like she just doesn't know how far it went, but she knew it happened. And, this is sort of a central crux of her character because it's torn her down. It's made her someone that really is not participating in college life the way that she should. And her friends, the sorority sisters, really spend a lot of the movie trying to motivate her to get her groove back. And for the most part, I think this is a pretty decent character motivation, except for one thing here. We get a sense of her history. She doesn't seem to be like really that badass presence on campus. For the most part, there's this whole story about the founder of Hawthorne College and the bust, and how her friend Chris, I believe, basically
it's Chris.
Yeah, she basically did this whole protest to get the bus moved from the lobby of one of the buildings into one of the frat houses. And I think, now that I'm reflecting back, it would have made our main character, Riley, a stronger character if she was really the lead effort in moving that bust. Because then once this attack happened to her, it would bring up a lot of different thoughts about like, hey, because she did really well in protesting and kind of making change on the campus, this dude kind of targeted her, and that really kind of tore her down. And it would really make the guys even worse villains than they are in this film, because they really just kind of like retaliated against her for just speaking her mind. And I think then the rest of the film would have fell into place as it did, and the message would have been pretty kick-ass.
So it's a little bit disappointing that we kind of lost something with them making her such a passive protagonist, especially considering that all the chips were there for her to be the badass active protagonist that she should have been by the end.
So
rather than having to resort to the army of fellow strong women that came in and saved the day at the end.
yeah, so I actually that was great. I agree with that. I think that there was one too many characters in the sense that I think if you got rid of either Chris or Riley and just combined those two characters, their meanings, then the movie is substantially better. So I think that is a fault. Yes, you have to have a sorority and there has to be a lot of characters, but I just think that there should have been a little more background extra type characters and a little less main cast because it was messy in my opinion.
Yeah, you definitely needed that sense of like really understanding like the world, and I'd say that that's lacking. But I feel like that comes from like most low budget efforts in this area. It's just a fact of it's ultimately at the end of the day you're going to be aware of the budgetary restraints. Like it's like what, like 3 settings in general, and I feel like that's just overall the sense that we get, and it feels like a situation where obviously it's very character focused, but it's also like, do we need this many characters, especially since a lot of them are just like repetitive types that we've seen a million times over again? Like, I've like weirdly enough, like this is a weird comparison, but like watching last year's Truth or Dare, like that movie's awful, but at the very least, I'd say they do a good job of like really fleshing out like how all of those characters are kind of terrible in their own ways, and it kind of adds to the unintentional hilarity of that movie. Versus this movie, I just feel like all of the characters inside of like the 2 leads were just like. We're just like chopping blocks, just like there to be killed off.
Yeah, and in regards to what you said about the setting, I mean, there's not much that really needs to be explained. It is college. We've seen college movies before. I just think that there could have been a little more set up in the way of there was really no show don't tell. They always kind of just said that he attempted to rape her, but there really wasn't any sort of no flashbacks, there was really no interaction around the whole thing aside from just the girls talking backstage and in their house. Like there was no male and female interaction of like the students on campus about like, did you hear that he raped her? Like there was nothing to paint the picture. We was just sort of thrust upon us, and that's like one of the crux of this character.
You know what it felt like? It felt like a sense of like, this is like a really awesome movie with like actually like what could be a really interesting mythology in terms of how this school's founder kind of influences whole legacy of toxic masculinity, trapped and trying to get out of the basic like slasher formula that we've seen a million times before.
Right.
That's what this feels like.
It was an interesting territory to explore. I just think that there wasn't enough time spent on the setup, which really, I think, made the first hour and like 20 of this movie kind of hard to get through, aside from the fact that it was so funny. You know?
I will say that in terms of like the plot, you know, it's like Hawthorne, the founder, you know, basically you know, was into the dark arts and had some spooky quote that got
defense
people
against the dark arts teacher.
Maybe who knows? Like our defense against the, you know,
or in this case, the dark arts teacher.
Yeah, I was gonna say the defense against the dark white male ego, or something like that. You know,
very true.
Yeah, that's basically the picture that's painted. And then you know, there's this secret frat house that, you know, is wearing Star
secret,
Wars
not so
level.
Secret. It's kind of like the biggest frat house like on the campus, right?
Yeah,
they all look like Anakin
in.
They all look like Anakin in that third prequel film.
So you know, I think this whole idea of like this school has its traditions and you know the kind of like male population, you know, middle-aged male, kind of just entering the workforce male, just entering college male. They're all kind of colluding together to work, you know, to hold these traditions. And then you have this sorority house that's coming in. They're tired of just being subjugated, you know, and I think that's pretty clear that that's how they put it in the movie. And they kind of just want to, you know, live life on equal terms. But, you know, things happen on this campus that are just not right. Now, and then it kind of goes from there to this giant political message at the end that we can get into once we lay the groundwork. Mm-hmm. But I think they focus on this political message, and I think they do a really good job with all the setups and the payoffs. And I think that is a pretty cool achievement to be able to have a message and be clear about it. I don't think anyone left that theater not knowing what this movie was saying.
Oh yeah, for sure. It slapped you in the face.
Made it pretty obvious there, especially at the end.
And you know, but when we come back to some of the problems, it goes to, I think, what both of you have said. You know, there's a bunch of characters. This is an ensemble cast, but the characters are there just to be killed. And then these death scenes happen so quick. It's almost like, oh shit, we have so many characters, like we got to get rid of this one quick because we got to get back to the political message. And so therefore you don't really spend time with the characters. I think there's this one Jewish student. We get three scenes with her. The first scene, her introduction, pretty early on in the movie. No one has their base yet, and it's like, "Have you seen my diva cup?" And we literally get to see her just stuff a tampon down her pants right there, and that's our introduction to the character. And so I think that's a pretty bold introduction. It gets you right into the film. You're like, "Hey, this is not going to be that typical." Sorority sisters getting killed movie.
Yeah, this is not your father's sorority sisters getting killed film.
Yeah, this is a little progressive here.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And that's totally cool. And then it's like the next scene that we have her in, it's like, hey, I'm leaving. And guess what? Every single other person that left and said that is getting killed the next shot. And then basically she gets killed the next shot. And it's like they showed her like frozen body as like a B-roll. To segue from one scene to the next later on. And it's like, well, this character was sort of, an interesting character or an interesting idea that just really we didn't get to spend quality time with. It was just like, let's hit the audience hard, with her presence, and then that's all we need. And, I personally felt you need a little more development across the board with some of these characters.
Yeah, I think there was more characters that I felt were not fleshed out than were. I can just, name a bunch. Her, the professor who's supposed to be the big bad. I mean,
he gets one scene where he's introduced and then he doesn't come in again until the last third where I'm like, wow.
Yeah, and I actually
he definitely was not going to be the big bad this whole time. Totally not predictable.
Right, and I actually didn't mind his performance. But we just didn't get
Carrie
enough
Elwes,
of it.
Because Carrie Elwes is the man. Has Carrie Elwes ever disappointed in any movie ever?
I just try to see everything as its own entity, but I know what you're saying. Yes, I agree. He is solid, but I just wanted more of that. I also think that, Brian, okay, I heard his name a bunch. Really know nothing about him. They all looked the same, by the way. I mean, terrible casting. Unless that maybe was the point. Maybe that was the point, right? All white men are the same or something. But they really just looked like Attack of the Clones. Like, I couldn't tell who was who.
I mean, I'm glad you guys are reading so much into this movie. My whole thing that I took away from this again, this was a slightly interesting premise trapped in a really generic, contrived, typical studio movie with like the most bland, basic white girl and just white guy casting you could get, to the point where literally the only person of color in this entire movie is possibly more white than the white people in this movie. Like, that's crazy.
Now, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Now, I don't want to cancel anyone in this room or get canceled myself, but I just have to say, if you are trying to make this political point, because I think we have to go there now at this point. I feel like we can't.
I'm pretty sure we already did. Like, when we started this.
We laid the groundwork, and now I think it's time to dive in, right? So if you're really trying to get this message across, why do you put it at a college that 99% of people in this country can't afford? Like, those frat houses are like anyone's best case retirement home. Like, if you do a good job in your career, you'll end up in a house that nice. Like, there's just like, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I think it was the wrong sort of school to...
Well, I think it goes with the part of the visual metaphor, which is like this kind of lavish university. It's an institution, that's well established. And legitimately, the end of the movie... the solution to the problem is to lock all the frat boys in a room and burn down the frat house. And so...
Literally destroying the old establishment in order to make way for the new one.
Exactly.
You're using a very old world technique in order to supposedly bring about the new just social justice. All things are equal and perfect world.
The thing is, like, it's a good, that's a good end moment, right? It's like they finally get their wish. They burn down the institution. It's a strong visual metaphor for what they were trying to achieve, but it happens at the end of a really kind of lame slasher film.
Yeah, definitely pretty lame. But I mean, you guys still don't convince me that like the setting was the ideal setting. To me, it sort of was like just counterproductive to every political thing that maybe they were trying. They obviously felt passionate about to write a whole film about it, but like it just felt like it defeated the purpose. Because if this really is about equality, why would it be at one of the most prestigious schools that, you know, like I said, 99% of people will never be able to get into or even see, you know, like
it's
the
funny
inside
that
of.
it's funny that you mentioned that because about saying that this setting isn't necessarily the most opportune setting, because I actually weirdly enough think that this setting is like, I don't think there's any other place that this possibly could have happened in terms of like just wanting to get across this story, in terms of like how do you step up the typical generic teen slasher as you were talking about, and also bring in some more like social justice themes that you want to talk about. Have it take place at a college. Fucking, it doesn't matter like where it is, but like colleges tend to be like the setting for like the most amount of like social justice like complaints of like, and for in terms of like reform. And yeah, like I feel like the college is probably a college campus is probably like the best place. And it's not even the first time that we've seen this. Like this, even earlier this year, we got the sequel to Happy Death Day from 2017, another slasher that took place on a college campus. Of course, that one had a Groundhog Day twist to it, amongst many other films and TV shows in recent memory that have brought that up. Russian Doll, Edge of Tomorrow, a bunch of other examples that have used that type of setting. But that's just one gimmick in terms of one slasher. This obviously was going for something different. But in terms of like a college campus setting, that's not necessarily something new, and weirdly enough, I think that it actually benefited this movie. Again, it comes down to low-budget filmmaking, terrible casting, and just relying on a lot of generic horror cliches in order to amp up what could be like a really awesome schlocky horror premise, like where if you just lean into it and really go just like bizarre and like make these characters like actually interesting and weird and not at all like just generic like boring people, then you could actually have something really interesting here. But alas, that it's stuck in all of those terrible horror cliches. So unfortunately, I feel like this film never reaches its full potential that it could achieve, which it does set like some actually really cool places that it could go to.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I wasn't not invested. And to what you just said, okay, that you know, that lightens my stance against like the setting. But I do think, to me personally, you set this in a CUNY, this movie is at least going up 1 star for me. Like it hits home with at least my political scope, the way I see things right now. I just think that, yeah, like I'm not as against it as I was now, but I just still think, like, personally, if you're gonna try and say all this in this wacky, zany way, at least like try and make the message you're getting across hold some grain of salt amidst all of the mindless killing and bow and arrow in the middle of a fucking...
See, that's the thing, is that I think that that's the thing, I thought that that's what was missing, is the overall wackiness and zaniness. Is I feel like if you upped that,
Wow,
that would have made the
okay.
that would have made the message like stick way harder. It's the fact that it felt so grounded and so just bland and boring, and the fact that these didn't feel like real characters, they just felt like types, which is what kept, I feel like, the message from like actually really sinking. Where it's like, if you make these characters like bombastic, like I'm thinking of like my frat and like some of the sororities that we interacted with up at school. I'm trying to think of like, if you make some of those girls, like imagine like for once that like it's not a bunch of like perfect looking like China doll-esque model figures. Like imagine if it's like some overweight, like for lack of a better word, like in terms of like how society perceives like beauty and all that, like ugly girls, like overweight women. Like imagine if it was something like that, something where it's like it would actually like buck the establishment a little bit. If it was something like that, where it's like guys are trying to kill them, but you're like, why would you want to kill them? It's like there's like nothing remotely cool about them. You know, they're the ones that you would think would like most likely go for that. And to see them like in that situation, but like actually have them have some like really interesting personalities and like bucking the system that way, that I feel like is what was missing. Like go all out, have it be like a Sam Raimi, like an Evil Dead fucking Darkman type shit, where it's just the most bonkers, nutso shit. Like that to me is what was keeping this movie back.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see that.
I'm going to ask you a couple questions here, because I think there's, you know, there is that, but I think there's a couple other things that were holding this movie back.
Okay.
The first murder in a slasher film is sort of just there to get you the tone. You know, introduce like what kind of dark stalker is in the midst, and really just inform you that, you know, hey, or remind you, if you didn't know from the trailer, that this was going to be a slasher. And so one of the friends gets a text message It's like, hey, I'm just gonna walk to the parking lot because I got to drive home for Christmas break. She's walking around. She gets these strange, what we find out later are not text messages. They're actually DMs, direct messages. They explain that to us. They
boomered in this film.
Yeah. So
they literally dropped an okay boomer in this film.
It's good. It's okay because I'm mansplaining now.
What
but
are
like
DMs?
they
Direct
explain to
messages?
me.
Yeah, they
social
mansplained
media.
to an okay boomer. Whatever.
So we got it. We know what direct messages are now. Because of this film, but
Thanks, Black Christmas.
The main thing is, she gets attacked on the street of this college, and she runs from like house to house, and she's banging on the doors, and no one's there to help her. She kind of looks away from the door and is like, oh, where could this guy have gone? He's nowhere. And she takes 2 steps, and he's hiding behind the snowman that's right there. She trips over the snowman and can't fight back anymore because snow hurts, I guess. And then she goes to the next house and knocks on the door, and no one hears her, and eventually she just gets killed in a snow angel fashion, which is fine.
Well, you know what they say. It's not Christmas unless someone gets stabbed with an icicle.
Yeah. But here...
So, yeah, in my family.
Okay. I didn't know that was a thing. For me, this is
kidding.
See, the thing again is like I'm waiting for like something like ridiculous to happen where it's like, yeah, he pulls an icicle off and he kills her with it, and that's hilarious in and of itself. Like that's a good horror setup. But like, bro, imagine if he had like been inside the snowman and he just pulled that shit out. And it's like like just this close up of his face. Like that's just hilarious.
I think that would have been a little less.
That would have been great.
That would have been a little less serious, and
Exactly.
I think this movie's all serious.
In the wrong way.
So for the most part, like. Just to finish my point is she made so much noise on that street, and like no one was there. And then they introduced the main characters, and they're at a coffee shop or something, and they like leave, or I forgot what it was, but the main character walks past that house, and there's these kids just rebuilding the snowman, and I'm like, okay, so the people that live at this house literally have children. So what? They weren't home that night. Literally last night, they weren't home, or they like took an Ambien and couldn't sleep, hear anything. The kids were just like, oh, the murderer broke our snowman, so let's just fix it. Let's not tell anybody. There was no babysitter. Maybe the parents went out to dinner. I'm sitting here like 30 minutes thinking, why this house have no situation? Maybe they went to the school caroling contest or something. I don't know.
So I want to believe that the filmmakers were really pushed by the marketing team because they had to get this out on Friday the 13th of December. And the stars aligned this year because I want to believe that they're like, wait, we need to reshoot a lot of this because we set the tone that this is a college town and everyone is pretty much away except for the orphans, who are the ones who don't go home to their family over the break. So that's why they didn't answer the door. But then 10 minutes later, they completely debunk that by having there be kids building the snowman.
Okay. The other thing is talking about the world building. The main professor is like, we're going to teach you the classics of white men and I guess women. In this case, because he brings up an example of a woman who writes something about subjugating women, and he's like, you know what? There's I can't really teach when there's a petition going around. And by the way, have a great winter break. It's like, you already taught the course, dude. It's over. The semester's gone. Like, you couldn't teach. It's just, like...
I feel like a lot of these problems so far are coming down to, again, it's something that I see a lot in these types of situations, which is trying to apply logic to a horror movie, which is already the first mistake, because as I've found, that's usually but besides the fact that that's usually the key to, like, debunking any movie, because movies are not supposed to be inherently logical in general, but horror movies are always the worst example, because it's always a situation, especially these types of horror movies, because it's always a situation of where, like, But we've talked about it like this numerous times. It's like every single fucking generic slasher movie where it's like, oh my god, they're falling down again. Oh my god, they're going off on their own again. It's like it's the same tropes over and over and over again. And people wonder why I don't like watching these types of movies, because it's probably the only situation where it's like people are consciously aware of the tropes and they complain about them every single time, yet they still watch them and they're always the same and they never change.
Yeah.
Okay, I see that point. And being someone who's watched like quite a bit of horror films in the past 2 years, I do have to say though, the genre is way more than just like the generic tropes nowadays. Though, like there are a lot of people pushing the envelope.
I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Like there's been so many great examples. The Witch, Get Out, like all these awesome horror movies that have actually like pushed the envelope and put the emphasis on like interesting stories and characters and like actually doing something with it.
So while I do agree with your point, I do think you have to like talk about films within the time that they were released. And so because of the envelope pushing we've seen in the horror film genre lately, I think it's a little harder to excuse things like that where the course is already wrapped up. It's your last class. You said have a winter break. That signifies finals have just happened. It's the class after finals that everyone hates going to, but you have to go to for attendance, right? Like, it's just inexcusable at this point. It's still a movie, and there's still continuity that needs to be established for the setting.
Yeah, I was basically, it sounds like I'm nitpicking a lot of things, and to a certain degree I am. And it goes back to that point that we've made where it's like the world is just kind of glossed over. It's Hawthorne College. There's bad frat boys. And there's these, sorority sisters that are going to be victimized, and so it's sort of like that's it. That's the world building. The characters, are what are they actually learning? Are they all English majors, I guess, because they're learning the classics. No one seems to be interested in painting. No one seems to be interested in science. No one seems to be interested in anything but their Christmas potluck dinner. And I guess, it's winter break. But, there's no one taking winter classes. There's no, like, they're on a college. No one's, like, cramming. No one got their grade and said, yes, I got that A I wasn't expecting to get. Like, they're not doing college things really at all other than, like, the college Christmas party at the end of this season, where they don't talk about, like, oh, hey, that was a hard semester. That was I met my, future spouse. There's like nothing.
They're not
happened.
even concerned with hooking up. In fact, that's
Literally,
like not.
Which
you don't want to do that at this college.
Which weirdly enough actually works to the movie's benefit. But again, that goes back to a thing where I've had a problem with for almost every single movie that I've seen for the last 2 years. It's number one, Hollywood's over-reliance on tropes in order to market their product. And two, the fact of sacrificing world building for just explaining everything in the first 10 minutes so they can get to the guts and the gore faster, which is something that I've seen in literally almost every single movie. And it pisses me off because I just keep seeing it over and over and over and over again, where the entirety of your world building, again, I've gone into this on previous episodes of this podcast, some of my favorite parts of some of the movies are sometimes where they'll take the first half hour to, depending on the overall length of the movie, hour, literally just having the characters go through the daily motions in whatever the setting is in order to establish the world. Basic, like, screenwriting and movie rules to follow in terms of setting up your world and getting you emotionally invested in both the characters and the world in order to get you through the movie, which is something that in the last few years, Hollywood is just deemed to ignore. Because, fuck it, why actually bother to set up a world that's actually with interesting characters when we can just explain everything to our dumb audience in the first 10 minutes and then just have them, like, be blindsided and just entertained by whatever shitty visuals we have for the entire rest of the, like, already short runtime, because we're trying to actively compete with people looking down at their cell phones almost 10 minutes into the movie.
So I got two things off that. One, Pat, since you're new here, I can verify he has said that a lot. And
I've said that a lot.
So just to let you know, when he said that was true.
Is that domsplaining?
If you want to call it that, sure.
Well, I'm glad you said the cell phone thing, because I forgot that until you brought it up. Now, there were more seats in this theater than when we all went and saw Honey Boy last weekend, which I think objectively and arguably is a better film. Now, why is that?
But overall, it would make sense. Like, I think we can both agree, we both understand why more people are inclined to see this over something like Honey Boy, especially considering the fact that probably most people didn't even realize Honey Boy was playing at our theater.
Right, so that gives me two thoughts. One, the marketing for this movie wasn't bad. We were all excited about, not talking down on this film. We just knew this would be a fun film to do a podcast about. So when we went and saw Honey Boy last weekend, we're like, all right, we got to come see this for better or for worse, right? And that my second thought is the irony of how there was less people in Honey Boy, but I was never distracted more in a film by people taking out their cell phones and lights going off in my face than in this movie. The person in front of me. Pat, you checked your phone a few times.
Yeah, that was probably because of the children outside the house and not saving them. I was probably like, oh, man, I got some text messages. I got to wrap up this business before the plot actually comes.
So since we have you, this is something that Dom and I have kind of exhausted, and I think he'll agree with me when I say what I'm about to say, but do you think the Disneyification, and I just made that word up right now, the Disneyified world that we live in has made it so that even movies that have nothing to do with Disney as a whole are sort of like subjugated to fall in line with either like, this is a film that's going to make you think. So common moviegoers, you don't want to go see this one because it's not going to be spoon-fed to you like Honey Boy. But this one's going to be quick in and out, and it's going to make for great conversation at your diner at the end of the night because it's going to be flashing in your face. You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think what you're really saying is that some movies are one-dimensional, and I've seen a lot of the Marvel films, even the new Star Wars films, and they are kind of one-dimensional. They focus on the journey. It's like the plot in most of those movies kind of happens in the opening, and then they go, hey, let's time out from the plot. Let's do a bunch of journey scenes, fan flare scenes. Captain America picking up the hammer, that's kind of just for fan service. And then all of a sudden we get to, the point where it's like, okay, climax time. And then they kind of tag the story back in, they wrap it up. And really, like, a lot of these movies are like 2 hours, 3 hours long, and you're getting like 30 minutes of story bookended at the beginning and end. And then just, fun scenes in the middle. And I can say that with this film is kind of interesting that I'm going to call it one-dimensional because it has a strong political message that's clear, and
maybe a little bit too clear, but
everyone can get behind. A dude seriously yelled like "Hell yeah" for women's rights at the end of this movie in our theater. And I legitimately believed him. I don't think he was being snarky.
No, not at all. I agree.
And so, it's the message is there and it's strong, and that's the one dimension. And then the slasher part, the interesting kind of like story that we want to see in the horror genre, that's not really there. It's just sort of,
like a typical slasher formula, build-up sequence to shitty dialogue and conversation between shitty characters to build-up sequence to jump scare kill to ended just over and over. The one thing I will say is at the very least this got to its climax quick, which I do like. Most of the time it's like we have to suffer through an entire first 2 acts of shitty characters talking to each other to build up to shitty jump scare kills, to usually with a couple fake outs interspersed in between until we finally get to the climax. But at the very least this was like got you into something like rather interesting. I'd say it around the midpoint, to the point where the entire third act was literally just like building up to this like epic brawl, which I'll admit I usually don't get in a lot of these generic horror movies. So at the very least I was grateful for that.
That was a bit different, though, than most generic horror movies. I think if you're someone who hasn't seen or hasn't been to the theaters as much recently for the horror films, that was sort of like I would say, I don't want to use the word special, but it was a different moment. But I don't want to get off, and I want to get to the climax after this point. But So, like, I guess what I'm asking is, like, do you feel that because of, the 33% ownership of the entertainment industry, the way that these Marvel films have really polarized and sort of dominated this decade that we're leaving, do you feel that there is sort of, like, only two ways you can go as like, the political parties in our country when it comes to, like, being a moviegoer these days? Like, do you think this film suffered from that, too, is what I'm asking? The both of you guys, like, what do you think? Because I personally do. I do think that there is a big issue happening right now because of this decade we just came from.
I'll let Pat go first on this one.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Dom.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry to throw the loaded question.
very
It's getting
welcome.
later.
I'm glad that you Dom-splained that it's my turn.
Yes,
Thank
there's much Dom-splaining on
Thank
this
you.
podcast.
So what I will say is that, since I have strong feelings about the message of this film and it being, clear and visualizing things quite nicely. Like, it's like I don't think if you didn't understand the anger that's there, I think you kind of get it now. You get how they're gonna stand up for the rights, and they're gonna just like basically they want these sort of dudes to stop really fighting to secure what they never really had. I think they use a lot of the tropes, the language that we hear from typically right wingers that are not really educated about these issues. And I think it's really well done. But at the same time, it's wrapped in this sort of like, I know what you did last summer, young actors, almost like there's some weird, I kind of want to say like bench warmers, like type comedic resonance, like
Is it bad that I thought Benchwarmers parts of that movie were funnier than this movie?
There's like a little bit of comedy acting, like in terms of just like the professor, he's just really overdone. And
see, weirdly enough, I actually thought that he was probably the only one that was like even a little bit self-aware about the type of movie that he was in, and that's like what made his scenes much more bearable.
But it's like my question back to you is if you're going for an intelligent message and you're pretty clear about that, and then you're sort of doing these like kind of goofy things in the movie to get attention. That sort of, doesn't that undermine your point?
It does.
I was going to say, it dilutes.
100% does.
It dilutes the message, and that's my problem with this new era we're in, because I think that there was a way to give you an intense slasher film and a politically clear message
charged one too
in the same film without like sort of stepping on the toes of that, which I think this film very much so did. And I think it's just a situational thing. I think it's hard to escape like the joke goes here in films now, and like like the beats that we're so familiar with because we've seen them over and over and over again by like the major blockbusters that we all go see, and so that's sort of why I was asking that. And I know you didn't give a clear yes or no, but to me that further solidifies my stance, what you just said on how I feel about like the decade we're coming out of, and how like these films that have nothing to do with Disney or Marvel are still affected by it. In my mind, of course, this is my own opinion, my own take, but I just can't help but think that off of what you guys kind of just said about it,
Yeah.
Well, and to answer your question originally, it's a situation where, yes, Disney is largely to blame for kind of this, like, monetization of the overall industry, but I don't think it's solely on them. Like, it wasn't, like, surprisingly enough, Disney, I would say, was, like, both active and passive in this. It was more so a situation of where they saw the area was ripe for the taking, and they took their shot. And understandably so, they're arguably, especially now, more so than in the last couple of years, the powerhouse film division in terms of like they make products that are guaranteed to elicit a certain emotional response from a specific generation, from a specific age group, and it kind of allowed them to take over an industry that was already oversaturated by a bunch of studios that largely controlled it, to the point where literally you had it, in addition addition to the rise of super advancing technology, with the amount of how cell phones have changed in the last decade, and also a situation with stuff like Netflix that came out that really revolutionized and gave like not just new avenues of how to present your art, but also just new avenues in terms of accessibility, which is a large part of it, and in a way allow Disney to take over even more so, because Netflix at the same time is providing the biggest competition to Disney in terms of, while also at the same time allowing them to kind of take over the theatrical experience, because a majority of the movies that people actually like go out to in theaters, like we talked about it in terms of like how many movies over the last month did we go to like on a Friday or a Saturday night too, not even during the day, where we're like, wow, like 3 years ago this would have had like a shit ton of people just to like see what it was, and now it's like, because it's not like a Disney event, people like the theater's empty, like literally like last weekend.
Dom, I think what's happening in the industry is very interesting, because you have Hollywood as it was, a couple different studios, and now we're seeing that things are consolidating, and Disney is really the one that's sort of leading the consolidation.
Most definitely
of traditional, intellectual property, and I think that's because Hollywood needs to, consolidate these classics, the films that generations of people have loved and known, all the other IP, and they're consolidating it under one house. To compete with the Silicon Valley and the streaming services that are really taking over our lives.
Right. And to bounce off that, you also have a situation of where like you have these streaming giants like Apple TV and Amazon, who Amazon's had their streaming service for like a few years now, but like Apple TV and another big one like HBO and Warner Brothers is launching HBO Max next year, and like Universal's got the Peacock, whatever their bullshit NBC streaming service, just to compete with Netflix, and you've got these massive powerhouse companies that are primarily tech based, that don't need this sort of streaming service, and that who are not going to make a profit off of it, but because that's not their focus, but because they just have the money to funnel into it, they can just put it out there.
Yeah, the streaming industry is growing in terms of revenue, and I think obviously when you start up a new business, you're going to put a lot of investment in it, and it's going to lead you into the red. And I think a lot of these companies are thinking that the investment's worth it, because I think, our theater going experience, like, hey, listen, we picked this movie because it was Friday the 13th. It was a Christmas slasher.
Was that an active choice? I'm pretty sure it was just a situation of where, like, we saw it was coming out. We're like, oh, this looks fun. Like, I didn't even realize it was Friday the 13th until we were actually watching the movie.
Well, when Chris and I were talking about it, we planned it. So I don't know what's going on in your mind, Dom, but, like, this was a clear decision on our part.
I'm the host, and I'm, like, being kept completely out of the loop here. What is going on?
Well, I think it made for good fodder in this conversation, right? We kept you on your toes today.
Most definitely.
Yeah. But
it's an area that I'm largely unfamiliar with because I don't like horror movies.
Well, you've done a great job with it, but
thank you.
Yeah, so I was, just saying that, the theater going experience, like, I still like going to the theater and watching it with a bunch of people that I know or people I don't know. The people that I don't know, like, I find it surprising in this film that two women looked like they were in their early 20s, just left probably an hour into an hour and a half movie.
And they weren't like the only ones. There were like I saw at least like 4 people during this theater that just up and left. I'm like, really? I feel like stick around to the end. It's like probably like weirdly enough, even though it's like not the best movie, like probably one of the more empowering movies that I've seen that like weirdly enough warrants it.
Like it wasn't. I don't think this was a bad movie. I think it was a bad slasher. If you were expecting a slasher you saw before this to be anything near that, then you expected it to be like the next Halloween, for example. It wasn't going to be that.
Oh, so that's the thing. Because I actually have a big chip on my shoulder because of the original Halloween. Because say what you will about that movie's technicals, but that movie started an entire, in my opinion, the worst genre of film there is. Like, I hate the slasher genre with such a burning passion. I don't know what words to use in order to properly quantify how much I hate the slasher genre.
Well,
like, hate it.
We just found our Halloween episode for next year, so stick with us because we do plan on doing the show for quite some time now. But to just sort of center it back to Black Christmas, right? What I do have to say about the people leaving, and this is just one man's opinion, but honestly, I think, and maybe I'm projecting a bit here. Okay, I will project. I just want to go to the theaters, to the movies sometimes to see a film for entertainment, and I don't want more of what I'm getting in my life. I don't want more preaching of politics from the left or the right. I just want to go and relax with my friends and get a breath of fresh air. And so I think, like, I didn't see the trailer for this movie. Maybe they hinted at the fact that there was some political undertones, and that's fine. Most films have political undertones, but this was one of the more in-your-face, sort of hitting every buzzy, trendy, topical, trigger-worthy sort of event topic that's happened in this decade. This sort of was like a nice compilation of all of that. But I think if you walked out of this film, maybe it's because, like me, you just sort of want to go to the film and see a movie sometimes to relax and unwind and not get more riled up about what already keeps you up at night. And I don't think that's a problem with those people walking out. I just think Hollywood needs to, so you brought up Hollywood earlier, I think, like, not everyone wants to, buy what you're selling in regards to that. People just want to, sometimes go out with their friends.
I will say that, Hollywood has gotten really good at putting the latest lingo that you've been hearing, whether it be on Facebook or your other social media accounts.
We literally got OK Boomered in this film.
Yeah, it's happened when it is said and it spreads like a viral meme, and then ends up in a movie. And it's almost disposable, some of these concepts. And, I remember just like some movies that I saw, like the local art house in Rhinebeck, Upstate Films. And it's like, it's
Great
about,
shout out, by the way.
Yeah, it's about this movie. I can't remember the name, but it's just about like growing old and dealing with like your first spouse dying and you're with your second spouse, and you had to come to terms with like, this other person that's no longer a part of your current life, but was like a big part of your life, and just like the idea of like old friends and family like passing away, and it's like.
What movie was this?
I forgot what it was called. I can't remember, but I'm just.
Did you watch this recently? It sounds really familiar.
This is a couple of years ago, but my general point is that this is sort of universal to people. Like I'm in my 30s, and you guys are kind of going through your 20s, and like we're gonna get. Hopefully to that age, and we're going to be having to look back and stuff like that, and this is a film that sort of opens the door for you to understand those things that you're going to be thinking about and be concerned about, and I think that's really the power of film. And I can watch Black Christmas and I can be all for the latest movement, but doesn't that make it a little more disposable? It's not necessarily universal. It's like I like the messaging. I think it's really strong in its messaging. But at the same time, like it's like I guess I'm gonna go read a book and see what the trend continues to be. In terms of politics. But this movie is not really, it's not the movement. The movement's going to actually be, going to rallies and showing your support and, doing some academic research and actually looking into things and
just overall just like educating yourself and
Yeah.
like putting in the extra yard work in order to like actually find this stuff out. Like the one thing I will say is that at the very least, the one thing I can say is that in the age we live in, there is now no more excuse for people to like not know stuff. We literally have the source of like any information on the planet in our pocket. And the fact that there are still so many ignorant people just makes me laugh, but also like really sad. Because it's like, it's the whole thing that goes back to Kubrick and what he was doing with his movies, which is where, how is it that every bit of technology that we advance, it's supposed to advance us, always seems to set us like 15 steps back. And it's funny because I actually wanted to go to your point about in terms of like some people just want like sometimes just a breath of fresh air that's not going to make make them focus on the method and plots of today. It's funny that you mentioned that because almost every single movie that's been successful this year that wasn't a big Disney movie are movies that were primarily just about having fun and chillaxing.
Yeah, and this was a good year in regards to me as a moviegoer and what I like. Sort of the points I've addressed are obviously my opinion, and so yeah, I agree. Like what Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, for example. I mean, if there was political undertone, it didn't slap me in the face like this film, and I do think that was a great way you phrased it. Sort of, I could have said it in way less words if I just would have said that I don't like a disposable film. I like to be able, and that's not a pun. I like to be able to come back to a film and grow with it, and this movie, if you don't know what's happening right now politically, and who knows where we're going to be in 5 years, I just think this is like a very much so like it had to come out in this time frame, and you need those kind of films. But I think that's inevitably going to hurt its legacy in the long run, if it was to have a legacy. I mean, it was a slasher called Black Christmas, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like, there's been so many of those movies, which is why I think 2019 was actually a really good year for film, because for all that I've seen in the past, like, let's say 5 years of these like disposable movies that are here today, gone tomorrow, you actually have some like saving graces. And I hope that in this new decade, we can sort of like return to form from all those classic films we were shown in film school and like that we all grew up loving, like Goodfellas and, Scarface, to name a few, like just movies that stand the test of time. And so with that being said, I think it's a good time to start like sort of wrapping this up. But if you guys have like a closing statement on this argument, like let's air our grievances on it.
I think I have one thing that I want to see what our opinions are, and I'll do a closing statement. So I'll leave it. I think this film, the best way to describe it is that it's like High School Musical meets Scream meets politics. That's the best way I can describe it. So as I kind of wrap up my thoughts on the film, I want you two to sort of think like what two films, are 3 films at max, do you think this movie can be compared to? And so you think on that, and I'm just gonna say like, there's some things that I nitpicked in this movie for sure. That I thought were kind of just like throwaway, and maybe I didn't really need to harp on them that much. But ultimately, I kind of liked the movie. I thought it was fun. I thought the dialogue was some of the worst dialogue I've ever heard. But like it was a campy movie. They were going for like a campy, funny movie, which at the same time is like, you're going with this awesome political message. Like, what's going on here? Is this just like you're just showing us how crazy the world is? The politics don't really matter, or do the politics matter? And I think that's sort of like what I don't really know what their true intentions are. With the film. And if the political message was meant to be serious, then I would hope that it would have been a more serious, film of the genre, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the remake, was really dark and intense and, scary. They weren't making jokes really, overtly making jokes all the time throughout that movie. It was meant to sort of jump scare you and get you like freaked out. And I think if you have this same political message and lean more into really scaring us, I think it would have worked out better.
If you had to rate it out of 5 stars, what would you give it?
2.
That's
okay.
About similar. If I'm giving my closing thoughts on this, in terms of like what movie this reminds me of, a lot more boring version of Happy Death Day with elements of Mean Girls and obviously without the Groundhog Day plot. Again, it's just overall, it's the same problem that I have with this movie with every single generic slasher movie that I hate. The difference being that here, it's an attempt at a message that actually, it with smarter writers and people who were actually more concerned with the message than they were with just making the next schlocky event horror movie, then I think that we could have actually had something really interesting here and get a better cast too. Definitely like the cast that this movie had. It's like outside of Imogen Poots and Carrie Elwes, it's like I'm not going to remember any of these cast members. It's more basic, bland-looking, generic CW star wannabes. And yeah, and that's really disappointing because it ultimately makes what could have been a really awesome movie with, I will say, albeit a very entertaining third act. Say what you will about this movie, and I do admit the dialogue is mostly shit and mostly everything about this movie is shit, but that third act is hella entertaining. Like, very, very much so. But yeah, I'm not going to remember this movie in like, you know what? I shouldn't say that. I'm going to remember this movie as like, yeah, that was that one really shitty horror movie that I saw and I had a fun time with Chris and Pat. So at the end of the day, you gave this 2. I'm going to give this, you know what? I'll stick with that just to be nice because that third act was fun. So I'll give this 2 stars as well out of 5.
I hate that you went before me because you pretty much said everything I wanted to say, and that just shows how much time we spend together.
Now you know how I felt last week with Andrew.
Because goddamn, man, I was gonna say, like, if I remember this film, it's gonna be because of, like, you know, Pat's first time on the podcast and just having a fun night with my friends. But there really was nothing memorable about this. In fact, I forgot most of the movie while we were talking about it. No, I'm just kidding. But you honestly did remind me of, like, the whole first act with the whole professor thing and whatnot. And I think that just goes to show the kind of movie we just watched. With that being said, I was going to bring it to, and I'm not just saying this like, oh, he has to have the last laugh. No, I promise you guys, I was going to bring it to, like, if you had to compare it to something, what would you compare it to? And so, to honor the title of the show, Talking TV, I'm going to say this is Riverdale meets Lord of the Rings, specifically the Fellowship of the Ring. And because that last sequence literally felt like they did a shot-by-shot remake of how in the beginning of the Fellowship, you have like that you know, long-haired human fighter who's like rushing towards Sauron, and they're both like, defend the statue, grab the ring, or knock it over, and you know, bury the ring and break the ring, and it literally just felt and looked just like that. So, you know, I think there is a Peter Jackson fan somewhere on that set, and so for me, I think that this movie did a lot and also simultaneously like did too much. Like, they didn't stick the landing. So I think that this would have been a better, and I honestly probably would really like this title if it was like a CW show where it was like we keep watching and get more. I just need more time with the characters, you know? Like, this just felt very half-baked. It didn't cook enough, like that ham that she made in the film, you know?
Yeah, so season 1's winter break, season 2's Easter break.
Sure, whatever it has to be, because they obviously have to always, you know, and it's like the closing episode of season 2 is, this can't be happening again. Fade to black, right? And then like,
it's happening all over again. More like Scream Queens. But at the very least, Ryan Murphy knows how to make something that's schlocky garbage and still make it entertaining. And that knows what it is.
So because we're not talking about The Mandalorian, I won't say there's nothing here to salvage. I just think that the medium that this is being delivered in is the wrong medium for what we're going for. And so for me, I think we have 2s all around today. Because I'm giving it a 2.
A 3-way.
Because the message was clear. The message was clear.
Star rating. So, with that said, Pat, this is awesome having you on. This is like a great new guest. I hope we can keep bringing on like more guests, and I hope that you return for other episodes as well.
Yeah, man.
So, with that being said, Chris, you have any final thoughts? So, Chris, why don't you tell the people where they can find us on the interwebs?
Well, so basically, if you guys are here right now and you've been coming back, thank you. We're actually getting kind of like a few more views than I thought we would, which we appreciate that, and I don't think we say that enough on this show. But if you're new to the podcast and you want to know where to find us, follow us, keep up to date with all that we have going on, of course, follow us on our personals, at Christian Evanko. And what's yours?
At Movie Nerd Reviews.
At Movie Nerd Reviews. But the podcast, the focal point of this conversation, is at Talkin TV, Talkin with no G. That's TALKIN, capital T, capital V, anywhere that matters. And Pat, is there any place or anything you'd like to plug or direct people to?
Yeah, I wish I had prepared more.
I can help you out. Something comes to mind.
Yeah, no. I'll have to actually reorganize my social media accounts.
Okay. You do a lot at the college, too. I don't know if you wanted to promote that at all.
Duchess, man. Shout out to Duchess Community College, our alma mater.
Well, it's true. You know, you're true. I do teach at the community college, and the main thing is I've been focused on really helping students develop a YouTube channel, and you can find it at whatthefalcon.com. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, some semesters were really cooking on all cylinders. I think, Christian, when you were involved, it was live at Studio B, a band show, producing like half-hour to hour television on the YouTube channel. So that was pretty kick-ass time. You know, this semester we produced hour shows. It was sort of comedic, kind of goofy, type of stuff, just like Double Dare ish type stuff, just like crazy hot sauce in the cupcakes style things.
Wow, okay, what a
crazy
description.
ingredients on top of pizza. So I think it's the semester is always feels too short, and I think that particular show hasn't fully reached its maturity. But hey, next semester, we don't know.
There's always a new class cycling in. And Pat, you also are a freelancer of sorts, and you have an Instagram with some impressive work on it. Why don't you shout that out real quick before we wrap up here?
Well, I wish I could, because I don't know where to find me at my Instagram. So
I'll tell you, it's at Patrick W. Huber.
Oh, I went very generic with that.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know it. I got you, man.
So Patrick W. Huber.
Patrick
It
W.
works.
Huber.
You keep to.
We know our social medias, yay! And with that, thanks for tuning in on the latest episode of Talkin TV. We'll be back next week, and as always, people, watch more fucking movies.
Watch more fucking movies.
We out.
Why all the expletives?
Just what we do.
No,
I don't know.
The
It's
producer didn't tell me this.
It's just what we do. I'm the producer, by the way, so
Oh, okay. Yeah,
fuck me, right?
yeah. Let me know when I'm not going to be on a PG show.